maybe a couple months of a review date so we could have an idea. That's really all that I can say at this time.
Sure. And so are we thinking that we want to just maybe pass from...
The scream tears through the quiet of a Jacksonville home. A mother lifts the corner of a waterbed, then staggers backward, hands trembling against her mouth. Officers crowd the bedroom door, their flashlights slicing across toys, posters, a baseball glove, all normal. Then the light lands on something that isn't. Beneath the mattress lies the body of 8-year-old Madeline Maddie Clifton. In court months later, her killer stands small and shaking, a 14-year-old boy struggling to speak. "I don't pretend to know or understand your pain," Joshua Earl Patrick Phillips tells the grieving family. The judge watches, stone-faced. Few juvenile cases have ever shaken a community so violently. Phillips had always been quiet, a skinny kid with a shy smile, a love for video games, and a strict father whose discipline dominated the household. Neighbors knew him as polite, even gentle. No one imagined he was capable of what would unfold inside his bedroom. The contrast became part of the horror. One version of Joshua lived outside the house, obedient, muted, unassuming. The other version woke up the moment he felt cornered. Maddie Clifton went missing on November 3rd, 1998. Her disappearance triggered a massive search, drawing cameras, volunteers, police dogs, and entire crowds combing the streets. What no one knew was that the child they searched for was hidden inside the home of the boy who smiled at them as they walked past. For 7 days, Jacksonville held its breath. Parents clutched their children tighter. Schools sent out warnings. Television stations broadcast Maddie's photograph hourly. And through it all, Joshua Phillips maintained his facade, answering questions from detectives who stood mere feet from where her body lay concealed. Joshua was born on March 17, 1984, in Allentown, Pennsylvania. By elementary school, he had already learned to fear his father's temper. That fear shaped everything: how he walked, how he talked, how he avoided confrontation. He wasn't known for cruelty, violence, or rebellion. Teachers described him as quiet, but quiet does not reveal what lives underneath. At age 14, he understood consequences not through logic or compassion, but through terror. Maddie's death, according to Joshua's own statement, began with an accidental injury. She fell, made noise, and he panicked, not because she was hurt, but because he feared punishment. Panic is not an excuse, but in this case, it was the ignition source for something irreversible. The Phillips household operated under strict rules. Stephen Phillips, Joshua's father, ran the home with military-style discipline. Friends later described an atmosphere where mistakes were met with harsh consequences. Joshua had learned to hide anything that might provoke his father's anger. On November 3rd, that survival instinct transformed into something far darker. The crime unfolded quickly, brutally. Maddie was injured, then silenced. Joshua dragged her body into his bedroom, sliding her into the cavity under his waterbed. He cleaned up, washed himself, acted normal. For nearly a week, he lived above her remains. While neighbors printed flyers and news reporters filmed interviews, Joshua attended school, played outside, and slept on top of the same mattress that hid his victim. Police officers interviewed him during the search, several feet away from Maddie's body. In the timeline of horrific juvenile crimes, few cases matched this one for proximity and deception. It wasn't a sophisticated cover-up, it was a child acting out of fear and doubling down with chilling calmness. Forensic analysis later revealed that Maddie had been struck multiple times with a baseball bat kept in Joshua's room. The autopsy indicated she had also been stabbed. The violence suggested not a single moment of panic, but sustained action. Joshua had to make multiple decisions in those minutes, each one pushing him further from any possibility of redemption. He had to find ways to clean the blood. He had to move her small body. He had to create the appearance of normalcy. Every choice compounded the horror. The breakthrough came when Joshua's mother cleaned his room. She found the wet spot, lifted the mattress, and screamed. Police arrived almost instantly. Joshua confessed soon after being removed from the house. He told officers he panicked. He feared his father's reaction and acted out of desperation, but prosecutors had another word for it: murder. During interrogation, Joshua provided details that only the killer could know. He described the sequence of events with disturbing precision, though his emotional responses seemed oddly detached. Detectives noted that he showed more concern about his father's potential anger than about Maddie's death. Psychologists would later debate whether this reflected sociopathic tendencies or the psychological scarring of an abused child. The question haunted the courtroom: was Joshua Phillips a cold-blooded killer or a terrified boy whose fear mechanisms had catastrophically misfired? In July 1999, Joshua Phillips was tried as an adult. He did not testify. His silence filled the courtroom. Prosecutors presented forensic timelines, photographs, a reconstruction of the crime. The defense argued youth, fear, and panic, but the jury saw intent in every action Joshua took after the killing: the concealment, the lies, the calmness. They deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life without parole. The decision sparked immediate controversy. Advocacy groups argued that trying a 14-year-old as an adult violated developmental psychology principles. Supporters of the sentence countered that Maddie's family deserved justice and that Joshua's week-long deception demonstrated calculated thinking. After Supreme Court rulings around juvenile life sentences, his case returned to court in 2017. This time he spoke, the line that became synonymous with his case: "I don't pretend to know or understand your pain." The judge resentenced him to life with a 25-year review window, meaning Phillips could theoretically face parole consideration around 2024. As of November 2025, Joshua remains in a Florida prison, his case a central reference whenever lawmakers debate whether children can commit adult crimes. The Clifton family issued statements describing their ongoing grief. Maddie's mother, Sheila Clifton, spoke about the impossibility of closure. Her daughter had been playing outside one moment, vanished the next, and was found in the most unimaginable location. The community of Jacksonville struggled with the betrayal. Parents realized that danger had not come from a stranger in a van, but from the quiet boy next door. Maddie had trusted Joshua. She had knocked on his door to ask if he could play. That trust cost her everything. The case reshaped how Florida handled juvenile offenders and became a touchstone in debates about brain development, culpability, and the purpose of punishment. Child psychologists pointed to Joshua's case as evidence that fear-based parenting can create dangerous psychological frameworks. Legal scholars used it to argue both for and against harsh juvenile sentencing, and in the middle of all the theoretical debates stood one unavoidable truth: an 8-year-old girl was dead, and a 14-year-old boy had killed her. Was this panic or pathology? A terrified child or a calculating killer? The truth sits in a place where fear and violence collide, and one life ended while another was permanently dismantled. And from one Florida bedroom, we moved to a rural interrogation room where another teenager's confession changed the course of his life and the narrative of justice.
This was profiled in the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. Now, the U.S. District Court in Milwaukee overturned Brendan Dassey's conviction and ordered him freed within 90 days unless the case is...
The video recording begins with a teenage boy slumped in a metal chair. His voice is soft, almost monotone. Investigators lean forward, asking leading questions. The boy stumbles, guesses, then gives an answer that changes everything. Brendan Ray Dassey, age 16, would be thrust into one of the most polarizing criminal cases in American history. His words, spoken during hours of interrogation, would later become central in a global debate. Can a child understand what police are asking in that moment? Before November 2005, Brendan Dassey was a quiet high school student in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. He loved wrestling, video games, and spending time with family. He also struggled academically, with special education needs noted in school records. His IQ was measured below average, and he required additional educational support. Teachers described him as a gentle student who struggled with comprehension but never caused trouble. There were no early indicators of violence, no history of aggression, nothing to suggest he could be involved in anything as dark as homicide. His half-brother later described him as slow and easily influenced by authority figures. Brendan rarely questioned adults and generally accepted what he was told as truth. But when photographer Teresa Halbach disappeared on Halloween 2005, investigators focused quickly on the Avery property. The home of Stephen Avery, Dassey's uncle, already under public suspicion due to his highly publicized wrongful conviction and subsequent release. Stephen Avery had spent 18 years in prison for a sexual assault he did not commit, freed only when DNA evidence exonerated him. His pending lawsuit against Manayowat County for wrongful imprisonment made him a controversial figure. When Halbach vanished after photographing a vehicle on the Avery property, suspicion fell immediately on Stephen. Dassey's involvement began with questioning, long, winding, repetitive questioning. The interrogations, heavily featured in later documentaries, became the foundation of his conviction. In March 2006, the teen confessed to participating in Halbach's murder. His statements were fragmented, inconsistent, and often altered after investigators suggested alternative details. Critics argued coercion. Police insisted the boy told the truth. Without strong physical evidence tying Dassey directly to the crime scene, the recorded interrogations became the pivot point of the prosecution. Watching the footage, viewers noticed troubling patterns. Dassey frequently responded to questions with guesses. When investigators indicated his answer was wrong, he would try another. When they suggested details, he incorporated them into his narrative. At one point during interrogation, Dassey asked investigators what would happen next, saying he had a school project due. The disconnect between the gravity of a murder confession and his concern about homework illustrated his limited comprehension of the situation. Brendan's background shaped everything in those interrogation rooms. Born October 19, 1989, he was known to be compliant, easily influenced, and eager to please authority figures. He lacked the cognitive tools needed to navigate police questioning. His defense later argued that he didn't fully understand the implications of what he was saying. Psychologists who reviewed the interrogation tapes noted that Brendan displayed classic signs of suggestibility. He wanted to give investigators the right answers, even when he didn't know what those answers were. His mother was not present during the crucial interrogations. His lawyer was not in the room. Two adult investigators questioned him for hours, using techniques designed to elicit confessions from experienced criminals, not learning disabled teenagers. But the statements were recorded, transcribed, and played in court. And once spoken, those words became nearly impossible to retract. The legal system treated his confession as reliable evidence despite mounting questions about its validity. The crime itself, the killing of Teresa Halbach, was horrific. Prosecutors described Brendan as a participant in the assault, murder, and disposal of her remains, acting alongside Stephen Avery. According to the prosecution's narrative, Brendan helped restrain Halbach, participated in sexual assault, witnessed her shooting, and assisted in burning her body in a bonfire on the Avery property. The evidence presented against Brendan was built almost entirely on his confession. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no direct forensic ties from Brendan to Halbach. Investigators searched his home and found nothing connecting him to the crime. His clothing showed no traces of blood, despite the prosecution's claim that he participated in a violent murder. The bedroom where he allegedly assaulted Halbach showed no physical evidence whatsoever, no blood, no hair, no skin cells, nothing. Forensic experts noted that the complete absence of physical evidence was highly unusual given the nature of the crimes described. Yet in the courtroom narrative, his own statements became the most powerful evidence against him. The jury heard his voice describing the crimes. They watched him on video apparently confessing. And despite defense arguments about coercion and intellectual disability, they found the confession compelling. Investigators connected connected the dots primarily through Brendan's words. The breakthrough moment, if it can be called that, came when Brendan, under the pressure of repeated questioning, confirmed details investigators had been suggesting. His arrest followed shortly afterward. Brendan's family was devastated. His mother, Barbara Tadish, insisted her son was innocent, claiming he had been manipulated by police. She described him as a naive boy who would tell authority figures whatever they wanted to hear. Stephen Avery, already facing his own murder charges, maintained that Brendan had nothing to do with Halbach's death, but the wheels of justice were already turning, and Brendan found himself caught in machinery he could not comprehend. In 2007, Brendan Dassey went to trial for first-degree intentional homicide, second-degree sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. Prosecutors played the interrogation tapes for the jury. Brendan sat silently, hands folded, expression blank. His defense team argued that the confession was coerced and unreliable, but they faced an uphill battle. The jury had heard Brendan describe the crimes in his own voice. Despite the absence of physical evidence, despite the questionable interrogation tactics, despite Brendan's obvious intellectual limitations, the jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2048, meaning he would be nearly 60 years old before he could even be considered for release. The courtroom erupted. Brendan's mother sobbed. The Halbach family sat stoic, believing justice had been served, and Brendan, looking confused and small in his oversized suit, was led away in handcuffs. In 2016, a federal judge overturned his conviction, ruling that the confession had been coerced and that Brendan's constitutional rights had been violated. Judge William Duffin wrote that the investigators had made specific promises to Brendan, assuring him that honesty would lead to leniency, and that these promises had improperly induced his confession. For a brief period, it seemed Brendan might go free. But in 2017, a full appellate panel reinstated the conviction in a 2-1 decision, finding that while the interrogation was troubling, it did not meet the legal standard for coercion. The US Supreme Court declined to review the case, effectively ending Brendan's appeals. Brendan appealed for clemency in 2019. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers denied the request. As of November 2025, he remains incarcerated at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His case became the subject of the Netflix documentary series Making a Murderer, which brought international attention to questions about his interrogation and conviction. Millions of viewers watched the footage and reached their own conclusions about Brendan's guilt or innocence. Brendan's case raises a different question than Joshua Phillips's. Can a confession be trusted when it comes from a child who may not fully understand his words? It exposes a flaw in criminal justice, interrogations built on authority, fear, and pressure, and it forces us to ask, did a teenager confess to something he didn't comprehend? The case transformed how some jurisdictions handle juvenile interrogations, with several states passing laws requiring parental or attorney presence when minors are questioned. But for Brendan Dassey, those changes came too late. He remains in prison, maintaining his innocence, while legal scholars and advocates continue debating whether justice was served or perverted in a Wisconsin courtroom.
It started with the tragedy, it ended with the tragedy.
Richard Rosenbaum was Michael Hernandez's attorney when he stood trial for killing his 14-year-old class.
The hallway is loud, lockers slam, students rush between classes, a bathroom door closes, then silence. Inside that silence stands a boy with a knife. His name is Michael Hernandez, 14 years old, obsessed with serial killers and determined to become one. What follows is one of the most calculated juvenile murders in school history. Michael Hernandez had 2 lives. One was the smiling student at Southwood Middle School in Palmetto Bay, Florida. The other existed in his private notebooks. Detailed lists, drawings, fantasies, the architecture of violence. Hernandez admired serial killers and studied them, mirroring their behaviors. He kept journals documenting his plans, writing about specific targets. He wrote about knives. He wrote about blood. He wrote about the thrill he believed he would feel. His notebooks read like instruction manuals for murder, filled with methodical planning and chilling detail. He researched anatomy to identify the most effective places to stab. He studied famous killers, taking notes on their methods and mistakes. He created lists of potential victims, ranking them by opportunity and vulnerability. And he practiced, not with people, but with the mental rehearsal that psychologists later identified as a critical warning sign. Born in 1989 in Miami, Hernandez did not show outward signs of cruelty. He came from a middle-class household, performed well academically, and avoided fights. Teachers described him as bright, even gifted. He participated in class discussions, completed his homework, and maintained decent grades. But peers later recalled glimpses of something darker. Intense obsessions, a fascination with violence, and disturbing conversations that slipped out when he let his guard down. One classmate remembered Hernandez talking about what it would feel like to kill someone. Another recalled him describing serial killers with admiration rather than horror. These moments were written off as teenage edginess, the kind of dark humor some adolescents adopt to seem mature or mysterious. No one connected these comments to genuine intent. He was disciplined for unusual behavior, but never for violence. No one predicted what he would do next. His teachers saw a smart kid who sometimes struggled socially. His parents saw a son who kept to himself but seemed harmless. And his classmates saw a boy who was a little weird but not threatening. On February 3rd, 2004, Hernandez executed his plan. He lured his friend, 14-year-old Jaime Goff, into a school bathroom before classes began. There were no cameras inside, no witnesses, just two boys and a knife Hernandez had brought from home. He attacked quickly, brutally, and with precision. His journal suggested this was not a spontaneous attack, but a rehearsed event. Jaime fought back, his survival instinct kicking in despite the shock and betrayal. The bathroom became a scene of desperate struggle. Hernandez stabbed him multiple times, targeting vital areas. With disturbing accuracy, Jaime's blood splattered across tile and porcelain. He collapsed, his life draining away while his killer stood over him. Hernandez had planned to kill more students that day. He had even named them. His notebook contained a hit list with specific targets and opportunities. But Jaime's murder took longer than anticipated, and the noise attracted attention. When he finished, he attempted to conceal the weapon and walked calmly to class. A teacher noticed blood on his hands and sent him to the office. He claimed he had cut himself. Within hours, his story unraveled as Jaime's body was discovered in the bathroom. Hernandez did not evade capture. Police quickly linked evidence, statements, and forensic traces. But what disturbed investigators most was not the act itself, it was the motive. Hernandez wanted to kill. He wanted notoriety. He wanted to be remembered. His journals, obtained through a warrant, revealed the inner world of a teenager fascinated by violence. Page after page documented his descent into homicidal fantasy. He had written about the murder weeks before it occurred. He had imagined how it would feel, how others would react, how famous he would become. Psychologists examining the journals identified them as among the most detailed pre-crime documentation they had ever seen from a juvenile offender. Hernandez had essentially created a roadmap of his own transformation from student to killer. During his 2016 resentencing hearing, after juvenile life sentencing laws changed, prosecutors played hundreds of recorded jail calls. In those calls, Hernandez expressed admiration for violent criminals, showed no remorse, and laughed about the murder. He spoke casually about Jaime's death, as though discussing a movie rather than a real person he had known and killed. The judge listened to every call, his expression growing grimmer with each recording. In that resentencing hearing, Judge John Schlesinger delivered a line that encapsulated the entire case. "I find he is the same person he was in 2004. This case is that uncommon case that does require a life sentence. The judge noted that Hernandez had shown no rehabilitation, no genuine remorse, no transformation during his years in custody. If anything, the jail calls suggested he had become more entrenched in his violent mindset. Hernandez was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The Goff family attended the hearing, Jaime's mother reading a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. She described her son's kindness, his dreams, the future that had been stolen from him. She spoke about the ongoing trauma of knowing her child had been betrayed and murdered by someone he considered a friend. And she looked directly at Hernandez, asking him why. He offered no answer. In 2021, he died unexpectedly of natural causes in prison at age 31, his death barely noted in the media that had once covered his crime extensively. Hernandez forces a chilling question. How does a child develop the mind of a killer without leaving visible warning signs? Was the darkness always there, or did it grow in the shadows of curiosity, obsession, and secrecy? The transition from fascination to action makes his case one of the most unsettling juvenile crimes ever recorded. Child psychologists studied his case extensively, trying to identify markers that might predict similar transformations in other adolescents. They found that Hernandez displayed several warning signs: social isolation, obsessive interest in violence, detailed fantasies, lack of empathy, but none so extreme that intervention seemed warranted at the time. His case became a teaching tool in criminal psychology programs, illustrating how teenage killers can develop sophisticated homicidal intent while maintaining functional facades. And it raised uncomfortable questions about the limits of prevention. If a smart, disciplined teenager is determined to kill, can anyone stop them?
Killed students Lydia Dew and Christina Menifee and shot 7 others. Kitchens prosecuted Woodham in June of 1998. The 16-year-old was sentenced to 3 life terms.
The emergency lights paint the parking lot in blue and red, reflecting off smashed glass and the steel barrel of a rifle. A teenage boy stands in the shadow of Pearl High School, the morning air filled with screams. The assistant principal, unarmed, rushes toward him, tackling him to the ground. That boy is 16-year-old Luke Thomas Woodham, and within hours, the people of Mississippi will learn that what happened inside that school was only half of the horror. Hours earlier, in the quiet of his own home, he murdered his mother. A manifesto found later will explain everything, or explain nothing. I am not insane, he wrote. I am angry. Luke Woodham had not always been a killer. Born February 5, 1981, in Mississippi, he grew up in a turbulent household, struggling with bullying, rejection, and intense emotional isolation. He saw himself as a perpetual outsider, a target for mockery. His classmates teased him relentlessly about his weight, his appearance, his social awkwardness. At age 12, he wrote violent stories filled with revenge fantasies and apocalyptic scenarios. At 13, he admitted to killing his own dog, documenting the event in writings later shown in court. He described beating the animal to death and setting it on fire, experiencing what he called a rush of power. By 15, he gravitated toward a small group of teens who fed his anger and encouraged his fantasies. One of them, according to investigators, glorified nihilism and framed violence as an act of rebellion. This group, which called itself the Croft, discussed philosophy, Satanism, and the meaninglessness of conventional morality. Woodham felt seen for the first time, but in the darkest way possible. The group's leader, Grant Boyette, allegedly encouraged Woodham's violent thoughts and helped him frame his rage as justified. Prosecutors would later allege that Boyette had been an accomplice in planning the attacks, though he was never convicted of murder. On the morning of October 1st, 1997, Woodham walked into the bedroom of his mother, Mary Woodham. She was asleep. He attacked her with a butcher knife and an aluminum baseball bat, stabbing and bludgeoning her until she died. The attack was prolonged and brutal, suggesting rage far beyond what was necessary to kill. Forensic evidence indicated she had fought back, defensive wounds covering her hands and arms. Woodham left her body in the house and cleaned himself methodically. He changed clothes, gathered his weapons, and left for school carrying a rifle. Students arrived expecting a normal day. Instead, they encountered one of the earliest modern school shootings in the United States. Woodham entered through the commons area, pulled the rifle from beneath his blue trench coat, and began firing. He opened fire in the lobby, killing 2 students, Lydia K. Dew, his ex-girlfriend, and Christina Menifee, her friend, and injuring 7 others. Witnesses described his face as expressionless, almost calm as he moved through the chaos. He targeted Lydia first, shooting her multiple times. Then he turned his weapon on others, firing methodically rather than frantically. He moved with cold deliberation, targeting classmates he felt had humiliated him. Panic erupted through the hallways. Students dove under desks, ran for exits, barricaded themselves in classrooms. But it was the assistant principal, Joel Myrick, who stopped him. Myrick retrieved a pistol from his truck, confronted Woodham as he attempted to leave the campus in his mother's car, and held him at gunpoint until police arrived. Woodham reportedly told Myrick, "Mr. Myrick, the world has wronged me, and I couldn't take it anymore." Police connected the school shooting to his mother's murder within hours. Evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, weapon matches, the manifesto, and Woodham's own statements. His manifesto, several pages long, outlined his grievances against a world he believed had rejected him. He wrote about being mocked, about feeling invisible, about rage that consumed him. But investigators noted that, while he showed occasional tears during interrogation, his emotions shifted unpredictably. He cried about being misunderstood, but showed no emotion when discussing his victims. Trials occurred separately, one for the matricide, one for the school shootings. In 1998, juries found him guilty on all counts. During the trial for his mother's murder, prosecutors emphasized the premeditation and brutality. In the school shooting trial, they focused on the calculated nature of his attack and his manifesto's clear expression of intent. The judge imposed 3 life sentences plus additional terms for attempted murders, ensuring Woodham would never be released. Woodham remained expressionless during much of the proceedings, occasionally scribbling notes but never showing visible remorse. His appeal based on an insanity defense failed, with psychiatric experts testifying that while Woodham had emotional and psychological issues, he understood right from wrong and planned his actions deliberately. As of November 2025, he continues to serve his sentences inside the Mississippi Department of Corrections, housed in a maximum security facility where he will likely remain until his death. Woodham raises a question that has haunted criminologists for decades. When does adolescent rage mutate into lethal intent? He was a boy, bullied and emotionally abandoned, but he made deliberate choices, leaving behind a manifesto that attempted to transform his pain into justification. Yet pain does not explain the coldness of killing his own mother or the methodical violence in those school hallways. His case became one of the catalysts for national conversations about school security, bullying, and adolescent mental health. It predated Columbine by less than 2 years, establishing patterns that would become tragically familiar. The isolated teenager, the fixation on revenge, the warning signs that went unheeded, the sudden eruption of planned violence. Psychologists studying school shooters frequently cite Woodham as an early example of the profile that would emerge in subsequent attacks. And while security measures increased at schools nationwide, the fundamental question remained unanswered. How do we identify and help teenagers drowning in rage before that rage turns lethal? From a Mississippi school parking lot, we moved to a quiet suburban house in Washington, where another teenager extinguished an entire family in one night.
This is a matter of the state of Washington versus Alex. Has appealed.
The scene is eerily silent. 4 bodies lie inside a Bellevue home. No signs of forced entry, no frantic struggle, just devastation. The Wilson family, Kimberly, her parents, and her younger sister, has been murdered in a single night. Officers search for signs of burglary, revenge, or a professional hit. Instead, the trail leads them to a teenage boy who lived less than 3 miles away. His name is Alex Barani. He is 17, and when police ask him why he did it, He says nothing. Later at sentencing, when the judge offers him a final opportunity to speak, he replies, "No, I don't think so." 4 lives gone, and silence is his only commentary. Barany grew up in Washington state, drifting through adolescence with few close friendships, often describing himself as detached from the world. Born in 1979, he slid into a subculture that embraced darkness, death, and glorified violence. His closest friendship was with another teen, David Anderson. Together, they created a fantasy world where killing became a form of ultimate control. They consumed violent media, discussed murder as an intellectual exercise, and gradually convinced themselves that taking lives would be a transformative experience. Investigators would later learn that peer reinforcement, not external trauma, helped ignite the murders. Barany came from a relatively stable home. His parents were not abusive. He had no history of significant childhood trauma, but he and Anderson fed each other's darkest impulses, creating an echo chamber where violent fantasies intensified until they crossed the line into planning. There was planning, intention, rehearsing, and a growing sense of invincibility. They discussed methods, timing, and targets. They convinced themselves they were superior to ordinary people who lived by conventional moral codes. And eventually, they decided to act. The victims were the Wilson family. Kimberly Wilson, 18 years old, had recently dated Anderson. Tension between them had grown after their breakup. Kimberly had moved on, which apparently enraged Anderson. And on January 4th, 1997, Barany and Anderson decided not only to kill Kimberly, but to exterminate her entire family. Their plan was simple and chilling. Kimberly was lured to a nearby park late at night under the pretense of talking. Barany attacked her there, strangling and bludgeoning her while Anderson assisted. They killed her slowly, methodically, ensuring she understood what was happening. After murdering Kimberly, the 2 teens then drove to her home in her own car, entered through an unlocked door, and methodically murdered her parents, William and Rose Wilson, and her 13-year-old sister, Julia. The violence was controlled, deliberate, and sustained across multiple rooms. It wasn't a frenzy. It was an execution. They moved through the house systematically, killing each family member as they found them. William Wilson was beaten to death. Rose Wilson was strangled. Julia Wilson was killed in her bedroom, given no chance to escape or fight back. The crime scene revealed a level of brutality that shocked even experienced homicide detectives. Blood evidence indicated prolonged attacks. The killers had taken their time. Barany's method relied on stealth and physical domination rather than weapons. He hit, choked, and strangled his victims. There were no shots fired, no neighbors alerted, no loud crashes. The murders occurred in near silence. The Wilsons killed one by one without anyone outside the house knowing. After killing all 4, he and Anderson returned to their social circle as though nothing had occurred. They attended school. They interacted with friends. They maintained perfect facades. Their attempt at evasion fell apart when Kimberly failed to show up for work and her family didn't answer phone calls. Concerned relatives contacted police, who discovered the bodies. The scene was horrific. 4 people murdered in their own home, killed by teenagers they had known and trusted. Police interviews with friends quickly led investigators to inconsistencies in Anderson's and Barany's stories. Both boys had scratches and marks consistent with physical struggle. Their timelines didn't match, and witnesses placed them near the Wilson home on the night of the murders. Forensic evidence, blood patterns, shoe impressions, and Barany's own physical markings tied him directly to the murders. Blood found on his clothing matched the victims. When detectives confronted him with the evidence, Barany confessed calmly, describing the details with a disturbing lack of remorse. He explained the murders in a flat, emotionless tone, as though recounting a movie plot rather than his own actions. At trial in 1998, prosecutors presented the quadruple homicide as one of the most calculated teenage crimes in state history. They emphasized the premeditation, the methodical killing of each family member, and Barany's complete lack of remorse. The defense struggled to present mitigating factors. Barany had no history of abuse, no diagnosed mental illness, no clear explanation for why he had done this. Barani listened silently as the judge described the brutality of his actions. He showed no emotion when photographs of the victims were displayed. The Wilson family's impact statements filled the courtroom with grief. Relatives described the loss of 4 vibrant lives, a family destroyed in a single night. They spoke about Julia's love of music, Kimberly's ambitions, the loving marriage of William and Rose, and they demanded that Barani never be allowed freedom. He was convicted of 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Years later, after Washington changed its juvenile sentencing rules following Supreme Court decisions on mandatory life sentences for juveniles, Barani returned to court in 2024. His sentence was modified to 46 years to life, offering theoretical parole review after 46 years, meaning he could potentially face a parole board around 2043, when he would be in his 60s. But even with that legal change, he remains effectively condemned to die in prison. Parole boards rarely release offenders convicted of multiple murders, especially those who have shown no remorse. Barani's case reveals how peer dynamics can distort morality. One boy alone may not have done this, but together, Barani and Anderson became a lethal entity. They reinforced each other's violent impulses, normalized murder in their private conversations, and ultimately acted on fantasies that should have remained firmly in the realm of imagination. Their fantasy world blurred into reality, and 4 people paid the price. The case raised questions about how adolescent friendships can become toxic, creating closed systems where dangerous ideas circulate and intensify. Psychologists noted that both boys came from stable homes, had no prior violence, and functioned normally in most contexts. Yet together, they committed acts of astonishing brutality. The dynamic between them illustrated how peer influence during adolescence can override other protective factors, creating partnerships in violence that individual teenagers might never pursue alone. And now we turn to a case where a teenager didn't need a partner. He needed only a house key, a neighbor's trust, and a level of violence so extreme a judge later said he was fascinated by his own handiwork.
As far as what his appearance looked like and what the evidence showed, it wasn't the fact that he was cleaned up didn't really, I think, help his case that much.
The Lafayette neighborhood is quiet, affluent, predictable. Expensive homes sit on large lots, separated by trees and carefully landscaped yards. A locked front door protects a family inside, or so they believe. Pamela Vitale, wife of prominent defense attorney Daniel Horowitz, is alone at home on October 15, 2005. A teenage boy approaches the property. He knows her schedule, the layout, and the routines of the household. His name is Scott Edgar Dileski, 16 years old. He has planned this moment. What happens next will shock one of the wealthiest counties in California. Scott Dileski grew up in the Bay Area, born on October 30, 1988. His home life was unstable. Defense attorneys later cited turbulence, losses, and personal struggles. His parents had separated, his mother struggled financially, and he bounced between residences. But what mattered more to investigators were the behaviors he developed as a teenager. He wore dark clothing, experimented with masks, and showed increasing levels of secrecy and concealment. He cultivated an alternative identity, adopting Gothic aesthetics and expressing fascination with darkness and death. At age 15, he became involved in a credit card theft scheme run through his social circle. He and friends were using stolen credit card numbers to order products online, having them shipped to vacant houses in the neighborhood. He knew how to cover his tracks and avoid detection, but investigators would later say that his need for disguise and performance suggested something deeper, a fascination with identity transformation, a desire to be someone different, someone darker. Psychologists examining his case noted that Dileski seemed to be constructing an alternate persona, someone capable of actions that his normal self could not commit. On the morning of the murder, Dileski approached Vitale's home during a period when he expected her to be alone. The house was under construction, with workers coming and going, creating opportunities for unauthorized entry. Police later argued that he intended burglary linked to the credit card scheme and targeted the wrong house, not realizing whose home he was entering. But others suggested he knew exactly whose house it was and targeted Vitale specifically, though the motive remained unclear. Once inside, the confrontation escalated. Vitale encountered him and likely tried to call for help or defend herself. Dileski attacked with extreme violence. Vitale was bludgeoned and stabbed repeatedly. The attack was frenzied, but investigators noted disturbing post-attack actions, including a carved symbol on her body, either a cross or a letter T carved into her back. The method showed anger, confusion, and an unnerving level of fixative brutality. Forensic analysts determined that Vitale had been struck over 30 times. The weapon appeared to be a piece of molding or similar object found at the construction site. After the beating, Dileski stabbed her with a 8x4 knife he had brought to the scene. The combination of weapons and the sustained nature of the attack suggested a level of rage that went far beyond what would be necessary to incapacitate someone. Dileski attempted to conceal what he had done by wiping surfaces, adjusting clothing, and leaving minimal trace, but he made mistakes. Key evidence linked Dileski to the scene. A distinctive shoe print found on Vitale's clothing matched boots he owned. The tread pattern was unusual enough to serve as a fingerprint. DNA material from Dileski was found at the scene, and physical items connected to the credit card scheme were discovered near the Vitale property. Investigators discovered bags of clothing and materials in wooded areas near his home, some containing traces of blood. Police interviewed him, and his behavior struck them as detached. He showed little emotional response when told about Vitale's death. When confronted with mounting evidence, he denied involvement, constructing alternative explanations that quickly fell apart under scrutiny. His story changed multiple times. First, he claimed never to have been near the house. Then he admitted being in the area, but not inside. Eventually, he ran out of plausible explanations. But forensic science had already mapped the crime. Blood spatter analysis, DNA, the shoe print, and the carved symbol all pointed to Dileski. Dileski's trial in 2005-2006 became a media firestorm. Pamela Vitale was not just a victim, she was the wife of a well-known attorney, giving the case enormous visibility. Daniel Horowitz had appeared frequently on television as a legal commentator, and his personal tragedy became national news. The trial took place in Contra Costa County Superior Court. Prosecutors detailed the brutality of the killing, presenting forensic evidence and establishing Dileski's opportunity and means. The defense argued that Dileski was being scapegoated, that the evidence was circumstantial, and that his alternative lifestyle had made him a target. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. During sentencing, Judge Barbara Zuniga delivered one of the most memorable lines of the case. "You were absolutely fascinated by your handiwork." She noted that Dileski had shown no remorse and appeared proud of what he had done. Dileski was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, the special circumstance being that the murder occurred during the commission of a burglary. He was sentenced to life without parole. In 2018, his sentence was modified to 25 to life under California's juvenile sentencing reforms, making him eligible for a parole hearing in 2030. As of November 2025, Scott Dileski remains incarcerated at California State Prison, Corcoran, where he continues to serve his sentence. He has maintained his innocence despite the conviction, filing multiple appeals that have been denied. Dileski's case exposes the crossroads where adolescent secrecy, identity experimentation, and criminal behavior merge into lethal violence. The transition from petty theft to murder happened quickly, leaving investigators wondering if the signs had been visible all along. Some psychologists suggested that Dileski's identity construction had gone beyond normal teenage rebellion into something pathological, a creation of a persona capable of violence. Others pointed to his unstable home environment and lack of consistent parental supervision as contributing factors. But the fundamental question remained: what transforms a teenager involved in credit card fraud into someone capable of savage murder? The disconnect between the crimes was vast, suggesting either hidden psychopathy or a breaking point that no one saw coming. From a Californian home invasion, we now move to a British classroom, a place that should be safe, predictable, protected, where a teenage boy changed everything in one sudden violent gesture.
He and friends of the teacher gathered united outside court, having just heard the details of her last moments of life.
We wish that nothing of Anne's...
Students sit in rows. A teacher, beloved and respected, walks between desks. It is an ordinary day at Corpus Christi Catholic College in Leeds until one student stands. In his hand is a knife. 14-year-old William Cornick has been planning this moment for years, not weeks, not months, years. He told friends he wanted to kill English teacher Anne Maguire. He wrote messages about it. He fantasized about it. And on April 28, 2014, he did it. Cornick's upbringing was not marked by chaos or violence. Born in 1998, he came from a stable home, showed academic potential, and participated normally in school life. His parents were supportive. His siblings had no issues. By all external measures, Cornick had a normal childhood. But beneath the structure was resentment, a growing animosity toward Maguire that became an obsession. He felt wronged by her, convinced himself she was unfair, and began collecting knives. The grievance started small. Maguire, a popular and experienced teacher nearing retirement, had disciplined Cornick for misbehavior. He interpreted routine classroom management as persecution. Rather than accepting consequences, he nursed the grudge, allowing it to fester and grow. He discussed his hatred openly with peers, telling friends that Maguire deserved to die, that he wanted to stab her, that he fantasized about her murder. But no one imagined he would act. His youth disguised the seriousness of his intent. Friends thought he was joking, engaging in dark humor, common among teenagers trying to seem edgy. No one reported his threats to adults. No one took him seriously. And so the obsession continued to grow, unchecked and uninterrupted, until fantasy became intention and intention became action. On the day of the murder, Cornick sat quietly through most of the lesson. Anne Maguire taught Spanish and had been at Corpus Christi Catholic College for over 40 years. She was 61 years old, beloved by students and colleagues, known for her dedication and warmth. She had taught generations of students, many of whom returned to thank her for shaping their lives. On this morning, she walked through the classroom as she had thousands of times before, helping students, answering questions, maintaining order. Cornick sat in his assigned seat, a knife concealed in his pocket. Then, without warning, he stood behind Maguire and stabbed her repeatedly in the neck and back. The attack was sudden and savage. Chaos erupted. Students screamed. Some tried to intervene, attempting to pull Cornick away. Others froze, unable to process the brutality unfolding before them. Blood spread across the floor. Maguire staggered, trying to escape, but Cornick pursued her, stabbing her multiple times. She collapsed. Students and staff rushed to help her, applying pressure to wounds, calling for emergency services. Maguire was conscious initially, aware of what had happened. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and rushed her to Leeds General Infirmary. Despite desperate efforts to save her, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Cornick walked away calmly after the attack, showing no fear, no remorse, no panic. He told classmates afterward that he wished he could have killed more teachers. He appeared satisfied, even proud of what he had done. Police detained him immediately. He made no attempt to flee or resist. During interrogation, he admitted the murder without hesitation, showing no emotion. His messages, internet searches, and written threats became central evidence. Investigators found communications where Cornick had explicitly stated his intention to kill Maguire. He had discussed methods with friends. He had researched knives. He had planned the attack for months, possibly years. During trial later that year, prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation and intent. Cornick had brought a knife to school specifically to kill his teacher. He had waited for the right moment. He had executed his plan coldly and deliberately. The defense struggled to find mitigating factors. Cornick showed no signs of mental illness that would explain his actions. He was not psychotic. He understood right from wrong. He simply believed Maguire deserved to die and felt no remorse for killing her. The judge described the murder as cold, callous, and shocking. He sentenced Cornick to life with a minimum of 20 years before eligibility for review, one of the longest minimum terms ever imposed on a 14-year-old in British legal history. The courtroom listened to sentencing remarks that emphasized planning, intent, and the danger he posed. British law does not impose adult punishment identically on juveniles, but this case pushed the limits. The judge noted that the severity of the crime and Cornick's complete lack of remorse necessitated an exceptional sentence. As of November 2025, William Cornick remains imprisoned in the United Kingdom, housed in a young offender institution where he will eventually transfer to adult facilities. Cornick's behavior during and after the attack forces a question: what transforms teenage fixation into lethal action? He had no violent history, no traumatic home life, no diagnosed mental illness, just an internal narrative that grew darker until it exploded in a classroom. Psychologists examining the case struggled to identify clear causative factors. Cornick appeared to represent a type of adolescent killer that defies easy categorization, neither obviously disturbed nor the product of environmental trauma, but rather someone who developed murderous intent through fixation and resentment. The case raised profound questions about whether such individuals can be identified before they act. Cornick had told friends about his plans, but teenagers frequently make dark jokes without serious intent. How does one distinguish dangerous fixation from adolescent posturing? The answer, in this case, came too late for Anne Maguire. And with that, we close the chapter on school-based killings and move to a case defined not by obsession with a single teacher, but by a teenager hunting victims at random, stalking the streets of a quiet English town.
And I saw him. It was laying on the grass. Like that. It was like.
The footsteps echo on a narrow path through Castle Park in Colchester, England. A cold wind cuts across empty grass. It is night, the hour when danger feels abstract, far away, safely confined to television screens and cautionary tales. But in the early months of 2014, a teenage boy stalked these paths with a knife and a fascination he barely understood. His name was James Fairweather. He was 15 years old, and within a span of months, 2 people would die at his hands, each for reasons that defied logic, reason, or motive. Fairweather grew up in Essex, born in 1998. His childhood was not defined by overt trauma, but rather by isolation, social withdrawal, and a growing obsession with serial killers. He consumed media about famous murderers, researching their methods and psychology. Investigators later found materials in his room, books, clippings, disturbing online searches, all centered around murderers he admired. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Yorkshire Ripper. Fairweather studied them obsessively, taking notes and creating his own archive of violence. Teachers described him as intelligent but increasingly volatile. He struggled with emotional regulation, anxiety, and social boundaries. His behavior at school became erratic. He had outbursts. He isolated himself from peers. Eventually, he was diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, which explained some of his social difficulties, but not his violent preoccupations. But that diagnosis did not explain the cruelty that followed. Many individuals with autism spectrum disorders never exhibit violence. Fairweather's obsession with murder was not a symptom of his disorder, but something separate, darker, and more dangerous. On March 29, 2014, Fairweather encountered 40-year-old James Atfield in Castle Park. Atfield had sustained a brain injury years earlier and walked with a noticeable vulnerability, making him an easy target in Fairweather's predatory calculations. The teen carried a knife and had been wandering the park looking for someone to kill. When he saw Atfield alone on a dark path, he approached. The attack was savage and sustained. The teen stabbed him dozens of times, continuing long after Atfield could no longer defend himself. Atfield suffered more than 100 stab wounds. The brutality suggested not a quick kill, but a prolonged assault, as though Fairweather was experimenting or satisfying some dark curiosity. Investigators struggled to understand the attack. There was no theft, no provocation, no relationship, just randomness, pure violence. When police examined the scene, the brutality suggested rage, yet Fairweather later matched the stabbing description with chilling calm, as though describing a task rather than a murder. 3 months later, he struck again. On June 17, 2014, he targeted Nahid Al-Mania, a 31-year-old Saudi university student walking along the Salary Brook Trail in Colchester. She was stabbed repeatedly, suffering multiple wounds before collapsing on the path. Witnesses heard screams but arrived too late to help. Almania died at the scene. Again, the attack appeared random. There was no pattern to victims other than vulnerability. Fairweather had not known either person. He had no grudge, no motive, no reason. He simply wanted to kill, and both victims had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Police launched a massive investigation, linking the stabbings to one another through forensic similarities and the sheer brutality of both attacks, but they could not find the killer, not yet. The randomness made police work harder. There were no personal ties, no traditional motives, no clear demographic pattern linking the victims. Fairweather evaded capture for months by wandering alone, choosing isolated paths, and striking unpredictably. He hunted for thrill, for power, for the sensation of control, and beneath that, he nurtured a fantasy of being remembered alongside the killers he idolized. He kept a journal where he wrote about his crimes, describing himself as a serial killer and expressing satisfaction at his actions. But such fantasies often unravel, and this one did. The breakthrough arrived on January 27, 2015. Police officers spotted Fairweather wandering near a potential third target location. He was carrying a knife. Officers stopped him for a routine check, questioned him, and found inconsistencies in his answers. He seemed nervous, evasive. In the police car, he confessed. He told investigators he heard voices commanding him to kill, but psychologically trained professionals later noted contradictions in his statements. His explanations shifted, his stories changed. Sometimes he claimed the voices made him do it, other times he admitted he wanted to kill. What remained constant was the violence of his actions and his lack of genuine remorse. In 2016, his trial took place at Chelmsford Crown Court. The courtroom listened as prosecutors described 2 murders committed by a teenager driven by morbid fascination. They presented his journal, his internet search history, and forensic evidence linking him to both crime scenes. His defense presented evidence of his autism diagnosis, arguing that his condition affected his understanding and judgment, but the judge ruled that it did not mitigate his culpability. The psychiatric evaluation found him fit to stand trial and capable of understanding his actions. The sentencing remarks were harsh and direct. He would receive life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. Despite your young age, the judge said, that will be a very long period indeed. Fairweather showed little visible reaction, sitting impassively as his fate was decided. As of November 2025, James Fairweather remains incarcerated in the United Kingdom, likely to spend the majority of his life behind bars. Randomness is one of the most terrifying elements of homicide. A lack of motive defies explanation. It strips away logic and replaces it with fear. And in the wake of Fairweather's crimes, residents of Colchester walked with a new awareness. Danger did not need reason, it only needed opportunity. In Nottingham, emergency responders arrive at a burning house. Flames lick the edges of the windows. Black smoke pours into the street. Neighbors stand watching, some filming on phones, others calling out to see if anyone needs help. Inside, they find a body, charred, unrecognizable. At first it seems like a tragic accident, perhaps an electrical fire or cooking mishap, but within hours investigators realized the fire was not the cause of death. It was the cover-up, and the killer is a 14-year-old boy standing outside, shaking but strangely composed. His name is Daniel Bartlam. His victim is his mother, Jacqueline Bartlam. Born in 1996 in Nottinghamshire, Daniel was deeply absorbed in television, film, and dark fantasy narratives. He spent hours watching soap operas, particularly Coronation Street, and became fixated on a storyline involving a character murdering his mother with a hammer. He wrote scripts mirroring violent storylines, creating his own episodes where similar murders occurred. His imagination cycled through revenge, destruction, and dramatic deaths inspired by shows he watched compulsively. His teachers noticed he was creative and introspective, showing talent in writing and storytelling, but they also observed that he was increasingly preoccupied with darker themes. He drafted scenes where characters killed their parents. He referenced violent episodes repeatedly. He wrote dialogue for murder scenes. His teachers found the material disturbing, but attributed it to adolescent creative exploration, the kind of dark fiction that some teenagers produce as they test boundaries and explore difficult emotions. No one truly believed a child would convert fiction into reality. No one imagined that Daniel was not creating fantasy, but planning reality. On April 25, 2011, Daniel waited until his mother was asleep. The family lived alone together. Daniel's parents had separated, and his father was not present. Armed with a claw hammer he had taken from their garage, he entered his mother's bedroom. She was 47 years old, a single mother working hard to provide for her son. She trusted him completely. He attacked her violently, striking her head repeatedly with the hammer. The assault was prolonged and brutal. Forensic pathologists later determined she had been struck multiple times, suffering catastrophic head injuries. Afterwards, he dragged her body toward a fire he had prepared in their home, pouring gasoline to accelerate the flames. He ignited the fire, attempting to destroy evidence and transform murder into accident. The level of calculation was alarming. He even rehearsed false narratives, telling emergency responders that intruders had broken in. He claimed that men in balaclavas had invaded their home, attacked his mother, and set the fire. But forensic investigators immediately noticed inconsistencies. The burn patterns were wrong for an accidental fire. The body's injuries did not match a fire-related death. There were no signs of forced entry, and Daniel showed no genuine distress, his emotional responses seeming rehearsed rather than authentic. The investigation dug deeper. They found Daniel's computer. In it were violent scripts and digital drafts matching the events of the murder. He had outlined attacks on parental figures with disturbing detail. One script, titled Dawn of the Dead, described a son murdering his mother with a hammer in scenes that paralleled the actual crime. He had researched weapon impacts and human anatomy. The hammer he used carried distinctive marks linking it to Jacqueline's injuries. Blood spatter analysis showed the attack had occurred in the bedroom, not during a home invasion scenario. Confronted with mounting evidence, Daniel's story changed multiple times, but none of his accounts aligned with physical reality. First, he blamed intruders. Then he suggested his mother had been attacked by someone she knew. Eventually, he ran out of plausible alternatives, and the truth emerged. His trial in 2012 captured national attention. Prosecutors argued premeditation, emphasizing the Coronation Street storyline that had apparently inspired him. They emphasized his violent writings and his fascination with the fictional murder he claimed inspired him. Mental health experts testified about Daniel's psychological state, but none found evidence of psychosis or severe mental illness that would explain his actions. The judge described the killing as chilling, stressing that Daniel's actions were intentional, staged, and manipulative. He had planned the murder, executed it, and then attempted to deceive investigators. The use of fire to destroy evidence showed sophisticated thinking. Bartlam was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years, meaning he could potentially face parole consideration around 2027. The sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and his age at the time. As of November 2025, Daniel Bartlam remains incarcerated in the United Kingdom, housed in a facility for young offenders. What makes Bartlam's case haunting is not the method, horrific as it was, but the mindset, a boy blending fiction and reality until the line dissolved completely. He was not a child acting from panic or sudden rage. He was a child acting from narrative, one he had authored, rehearsed, and finally performed. The case raised disturbing questions about media influence on vulnerable adolescents and whether violent content can inspire imitation in certain predisposed individuals. But it also illustrated a deeper truth, that some teenagers develop the capacity for calculated violence, planning murders with the same attention to detail that others might apply to school projects.
Aaron Thomas Campbell, you were found guilty of the abduction, rape.
Isle of Bute, Scotland. A quiet place, beautiful, surrounded by water and community familiarity. The island's population is small, just a few thousand residents who know each other by name. Children roam freely, playing in parks and walking to school without concern. Neighbours know one another, doors are left unlocked, and the air feels safe. It is the kind of place where parents believe their children are protected simply by geography and community bonds. But on July 2nd, 2018, that sense of safety shattered. 6-year-old Alicia McFarl was reported missing from her grandparents' home in the early morning hours. Search teams fanned across the island at dawn, volunteers joining police in scouring beaches, woods, and residential areas. And when her body was discovered in the woods near the hotel where her grandparents lived, the island transformed from idyllic sanctuary to crime scene. The killer was a 16-year-old boy named Aaron Campbell. Campbell grew up on the island, born in 2002. He had no major criminal history, no public signs of violence. His family was well known in the community. He attended the local school and participated in normal teenage activities, but investigators found clues in his behavior: manipulation, attention-seeking, and signs of duplicity. He was known to be charismatic but self-centered. Friends described him as a boy who craved dominance in social interactions, sometimes lying compulsively for effect. He enjoyed being the center of attention and manipulated situations to ensure he remained there. Some peers found him charming, others found him unsettling, but none suspected he was capable of what he would do. In the early morning hours of July 2nd, Campbell entered the ground floor apartment where Alicia was sleeping. She was visiting her grandparents on the island, a regular summer trip. Police later reconstructed the timeline using CCTV footage from nearby businesses, DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene, and witness statements. Campbell had been out late, drinking and using cannabis. He later admitted he was looking for someone to assault. He entered the apartment through an unlocked door, found Alicia asleep, and abducted her. He carried the 6-year-old child out of the apartment and through dark wooded areas, taking her deep into the forest behind the property. The acts that occurred next were part of Scotland's most horrific juvenile case in recent history. Alicia was subjected to a sexual assault and then murdered. She suffered catastrophic injuries. The pathologist who performed the autopsy described the injuries as among the worst she had ever seen. Alicia did not survive. Her small body was left in the woods, hidden beneath branches. Campbell attempted to mislead investigators, staging alibis, posting on social media, inserting himself into discussions of the case. He joined the search efforts, helping look for Alicia while knowing exactly where she was. He expressed sympathy to her family. He discussed the case on Facebook, posting messages of concern and outrage. It was a performance, carefully constructed to deflect suspicion, but investigators quickly focused on him. His clothing showed signs of recent washing. His shoes had been cleaned. Scratches on his body suggested a struggle, and crucially, his DNA was found on Alicia's body and at the crime scene. CCTV captured his movements during the critical time period, showing him walking toward the wooded area and returning later. His story about his whereabouts changed multiple times when confronted by police. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His DNA was found on Alicia's body in locations consistent with sexual assault. CCTV captured his movements matching the timeline of the abduction and murder. Fibers from his clothing matched fibers found on Alicia's body. His story changed multiple times, each version contradicted by physical evidence. Eventually, during sentencing after his conviction, he admitted what he had done, offering a chilling glimpse into his mindset. He showed no remorse, describing his actions in detached terms. The judge called him cold, calculating, and remorseless. At 16, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years, one of the longest sentences ever imposed on a juvenile offender in Scotland. Later, this term was reduced to 24 years on appeal after Campbell's lawyers argued the original sentence was excessive for someone of his age. Even with that reduction, Campbell will spend decades in prison, likely not facing parole consideration until he is in his 40s. As of November 2025, Aaron Campbell remains incarcerated in Scotland, housed in a facility for young offenders where he will eventually transfer to adult prisons. Campbell's case shakes the core belief that harm comes from outsiders. He was not a stranger, not an intruder from the mainland. He was a boy the island's families knew. He had grown up alongside their children, and that betrayal magnifies the horror. When trust is broken at that level, an entire community is forced to redefine safety, childhood, and innocence. The Isle of Bute's residents spoke about a loss of innocence, a realization that evil can exist even in the most beautiful and seemingly protected places. Parents began locking doors. Children were no longer allowed to wander freely. The island's character changed permanently, shaped by the knowledge that one of their own had committed an unthinkable act. Across these 10 cases, one truth becomes unavoidable. Adolescence is not a shield against violence. These boys were not hardened career criminals with decades of brutality behind them. They were students, neighbors, sons, peers, children whose minds formed in ways that defy easy categorization. Some acted out of rage, their violence erupting from years of bullying, rejection, and emotional pain. Some out of panic, making terrible decisions in moments of fear that spiraled into irreversible horror. Some out of fantasy, confusing fictional narratives with reality until the boundary dissolved completely. Others out of predatory intent, hunting victims with calculation that belied their youth. But the impact of their actions was identical. Families destroyed, communities shaken, lives permanently altered, and innocence shattered. Their cases shaped legal debates about juvenile sentencing, interrogation practices, mental health evaluation, and parole policy. Courts wrestled with fundamental questions. Can a 14-year-old truly understand the finality of murder? Should teenagers be sentenced as adults when their brains are still developing? What role should rehabilitation play versus punishment and public safety? They remind us that evil does not arrive fully formed. It develops, influenced by environment, psychology, opportunity, and choice. Some of these boys came from abusive homes. Others came from stable, loving families. Some showed early warning signs. Others seemed perfectly normal until the moment they killed. The diversity of their backgrounds challenges simplistic explanations and forces us to acknowledge the complexity of human violence. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which of these killers do you think was the most disturbing? Share your thoughts in the comments below.